I still remember the first time she called me dad as though it were yesterday. I'd taken her to the hair salon that Saturday morning, the sun barely warmed, the air sharp against my cheeks. She sat perched on the edge of the stylist's chair, knees swinging, eyes downcast as the woman wrapped sections of her hair around plastic braiding combs. I hovered behind her, heart thrumming louder than the blow dryer. "Will you braid it like Mom used to?" she asked, voice small. Her prototype of hope. At 9 years old, she had learned to speak in whispers when her real father appeared, 2 visits a year, a check in his palm, and then silence until next Christmas. Malcolm was a phantom presence in her life, and yet, in that moment, she looked to me for the gentleness she deserved. My name is Daniel Prescott. I'm 54 years old, and I know better than anyone that families aren't simply born, they're built, piece by painstaking piece. Before Leona and I met, I'd imagined fatherhood as distant prospect, something for younger men, for those who hadn't weathered the disappointments of middle age. But when I saw Sadie's lip quiver as she stared at the mirror, watching curl by curl fall into neat patterns, I felt an unfamiliar surge of purpose. I wasn't stepping in to erase Malcolm's absence. I was stepping forward to fill every gap his neglect left behind. There was no grand proclamation, no official adoption papers. It began with scraped knee band-aids and store-bought ice packs after fall-off-your-bike incidents. It grew through late nights at the kitchen table, helping her count fractions when algebra refused to make sense. I learned the weight of her school backpack, the sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway when a joke struck just right. Every Saturday, I picked her up from her mother's apartment, an old 2-bedroom near the elementary school. Watching her dart down the front steps, hand in hand with Leona, a cluster of artwork stuffed in her backpack, my heart would swallow itself, full of pride, fear, and something I finally recognized as love. Leona and I were both bruised by divorce when we met at a charity gala for foster children. She wore that green dress that brought out her eyes. I spilled red wine on my cufflink. We laughed at our shared clumsiness, flicked polite conversation at one another like practiced sailors. I noticed Sadie's smile that night, shy and frank, and thought I would give anything for it to never fade. I didn't sign up to replace anyone. I simply chose to stay. Year by year, moment by moment. I earned the title Dad the day she stood at her high school graduation stage in a royal blue cap and gown. I watched her climb those steps in heels too high, tassel swinging like a pendulum counting down to a new life. My chest tightened so completely I thought it might seize. When the principal handed her the diploma, when the crowd erupted in applause, she looked over her shoulder at me, eyes bright under the mortarboard, and she whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "Thanks, Dad." That single syllable carried the weight of every bedtime story I read when she was 4, every PTA meeting I attended when I'd rather have been elsewhere, every hospital visit when flu season swept through her class. It recognized the scraped knee bandages, the algebra explanations that made my brain ache, the late-night talks about broken friendships and first crushes. It acknowledged the hundreds of hours I'd spent showing up, showing interest, showing care. In that moment, I understood that fatherhood is not defined by DNA or court decrees, but by presence and persistence. As I stood there, applauding until my hands stung, I felt a warmth spread from my chest through every limb. It wasn't pride alone. It was relief. Relief that the years I poured into her life had counted for something. Relief that she could see me, not as a placeholder, not as a backup plan, but as her dad. When the tassel shifted and the ceremony moved on, I held tightly to that moment, committing it to memory. Because life, like hair, cannot entangle in ways we never expect. But love, patient and steadfast, has a way of holding every strand together, one careful braid at a time. It started small, little shifts. Barely noticeable at first, like a favorite song losing its chorus. Sadie was 20 when it began, living at her college dorm 2 hours away, coming home less and less. At first, I chalked it up to the normal pull of independence. I even encouraged it. I wanted her to grow, to live fully, to feel freedom in her bones. That's what a good father does, right? You build the bridge, then you let them walk it. But there were signs, small but sharp. The phone calls that used to light up my evenings came less frequently, and when they did come, they were clipped, rushed. Sometimes she called me Daniel by accident. That's what she told me. Oops, sorry, force of habit. Everyone at school calls me by my first name. It just slipped. At first, I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. And then there was Malcolm. He'd been a ghost most of Sadie's life, popping in for birthdays he often forgot, sending checks with no return address, and taking selfies when he showed up like some kind of vacationing uncle. But somewhere around her 20th birthday, he rebranded himself. Suddenly, Malcolm had discovered Instagram. He was uploading throwback photos, baby Sadie on a tricycle, toddler Sadie blowing out candles. Captions like, "My princess, my pride," written beneath a photo that I was cropped out of. I remember the first time I saw one. It felt like someone had plucked me clean out of the frame, like I was never there to begin with. Not at the park, not at the zoo, not at the hospital when she broke her wrist falling from monkey bars. Just gone. What confused me wasn't that Malcolm had started trying. It was that Sadie started responding, loving his posts, sharing them, commenting with hearts, and, "Thanks, Dad. Love you too." I tried not to overanalyze it. I told myself it was just her trying to mend old wounds. She had a right to want something from him. Everyone wants to know where they came from. But I won't lie, when I saw my name disappear from her bio, replaced by Sadie James, her middle name, not mine, I felt something fold in on itself. It was as if every moment we shared had been lightly erased, the chalk dust of our years blown away by the gust of her desire to connect with him. And when I asked her about it, about us, about him, she didn't even meet my eyes. Then she got engaged. His name was Grant. He was decent, smart, polished. He shook my hand the first time we met and called me sir. We talked about career ambitions, their honeymoon plans, the ring. He really tried. And I told myself, this is good. This is what you raised her for. Stability, love, a future. But then came the comment, the one I still can't forget. We were sitting in the backyard during a barbecue Leona had planned. Grant was manning the grill, the dogs were weaving between guests, and the sun was setting just right on the edge of the fence. I passed Sadie a lemonade, smiled, and said something about how proud I was of her. She laughed lightly, then said, "I'm just glad both my parents will walk me down the aisle." Both. I must have blinked too slowly because she added, "Malcolm and me already picked the song. You'll see." She smiled like she'd said something sweet, something inclusive. Like she hadn't just carved me out of the picture with a single word. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. And in that silence, something in me twisted. It wasn't about not being chosen. It was about never being considered. About being invisible in the very role I gave my heart to. I'd been her emotional scaffolding for over a decade, holding her together while she figured herself out. I'd worn the title of Dad with pride. And now I was back to Daniel. Just the man who helped with homework, paid for school trips, fixed flat tires, and paid part of her tuition. I told Leona that night, while she was rinsing dishes in the sink. She didn't argue. She didn't console. She just paused. "She's just young," she said. "She doesn't know what she's doing." But I did. I knew what was happening. I was being rewritten. Not vilified. Not scorned. Just replaced. Erased. Later that week, she sent me the mock-up of the wedding invitations. I stared at it for a long time. It had Grant's parents' names. Malcolm's. Leona's. Mine wasn't there. I remember holding that glossy cardstock under the kitchen light, turning it over, reading and rereading the script like maybe my name had been cleverly hidden somewhere, like a magic eye puzzle. But no, just Daniel, standing in the margins again. So I did what I always did. I swallowed it, smiled, offered to help with the planning. I drove her to the florist, paid the deposit for the venue when their budget came up short. I let her talk about dress styles and appetizers and color schemes. I was present, supportive, helpful, and she thanked me by saying, "Daniel, can you hold my phone while I talk to Grant real quick?" Not Dad, not even hey, just Daniel, like I was the hired help. Funny thing is, I still kept showing up, because it's what I'd always done, not for recognition, not for claps, not even for love, if I'm honest. I showed up because love, when it's real, doesn't keep score. It just stays, even when it's demoted. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing in my chest every time she said his name with reverence and mine with formality. I couldn't ignore that for her. I had become a transaction. Useful, dependable, background. The truth is, the fall from Dad to Daniel isn't a drop, it's a slow slide. A quiet unraveling that begins with silence and ends with a shrug. But when it's over, you feel it like a snap in your ribs. And still, I stayed. Because love, even unrecognized, still counts. But I was starting to wonder how long I could go unseen before I disappeared completely. The day I offered to cover the venue deposit, Sadie didn't even blink. $12,000. Just a quick nod, as if I were confirming her Uber Eats order, not draining savings that I'd spent years building. She didn't say thank you, not even a half smile. Just tapped something into her phone and moved on to choosing centerpieces. A part of me wanted to believe she was overwhelmed, distracted, that gratitude would come later, in private, when she had a moment to breathe. But that moment never arrived. I stood there in the boutique with her and Leona, surrounded by satin swatches and champagne flutes, and I realized something heavy. I wasn't included. I was tolerated. Needed, perhaps, but never invited. I was the man with the checkbook, the logistical lifeline. Not a father, not even a guest of honor. Just Daniel. She used my first name openly now. At tastings, at fittings, at meetings with the planner. Daniel, can you hold this? Daniel, can you drive me to the seamstress on Tuesday? At one point, the florist even asked, and you are? Before glancing at my credit card and adding, the one paying. That got a chuckle from Leona. Sadie didn't even look up. What no one said. What hung thick in the air was that I was footing the bill for a wedding I barely existed in. There were whispers about Malcolm coming in from Atlanta, how he'd promised to give a speech, how he was bringing extended family I'd never met. Sadie had shown the planner a childhood photo of the two of them to use in the slideshow. I knew the picture. It was one of the few times Malcolm had actually taken her to the park. She was 5. He'd stayed just long enough to snap that one picture and then disappeared for another 11 months. I wasn't in any of the pictures she submitted. She removed my last name from her bio, said it didn't fit the aesthetic she was going for. James sounds softer, she said, when I asked. Besides, I was never legally a Prescott. She said it without malice, like she was discussing fabric textures or font choices. Just facts. The first time I felt the sting of it fully, I was at the cake tasting. The planner had just finished running through the flavors, and I joked about how Sadie used to hate strawberries. She smiled politely, looked at Grant, and said, Daniel has a great memory. Just that. Daniel. No warmth. No trace of the girl who once cried into my neck when she didn't make the dance team, or who used to sneak into my home office just to sit beside me and color. Leona noticed. I could tell. She gave me a few side glances here and there, opened her mouth a few times like she wanted to say something. But she didn't, and I didn't ask her to. We were on thin ice already, both of us pretending that this version of our family was whole, was functioning, was healthy. But we both knew, deep down, we were propping up a dying tree with duct tape and borrowed time. Each week, my involvement grew, and my presence diminished. I paid the DJ. I booked the photographer. I even upgraded the chairs at the last minute because Sadie said the standard ones looked too cheap. I nodded, pulled out my phone, paid the invoice while she scrolled through Pinterest for centerpiece inspiration. Every time I tried to insert myself, to engage in something emotional, like the slideshow or the ceremony readings, she steered around me. We're good on that, Daniel. Thanks. It was always polite, crisp, and final. There was a night I remember too clearly. I had dropped her off after another round of errands and sat in the driveway of my own home, alone. I looked around the living room, still cluttered with decorations I'd agreed to store temporarily. I saw a box labeled Bride and Groom Favors on the coffee table. Not a single label with my name. No sign that I existed in the celebration beyond the logistics and receipts. I opened a drawer, pulled out the binder where I kept all the contracts and printed invoices. I tallied them one by one. The venue, the music, the flowers, the bar package. $37,000 spent. No ceremony roll, no speech, no walk down the aisle. I was paying for an event I had been quietly erased from. That realization didn't explode. It settled in, like dust after a long construction project. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. Just empty. Like I'd spent years building a lighthouse for someone who preferred the dark. What made it worse was how normalized it had become. No one questioned it. Not Sadie. Not Leona. Not even Grant, who always smiled at me like a concierge grateful for good service. They all let it happen, brick by brick, word by word, silence by silence. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being recategorized. She let me fund it, but she wouldn't let me be part of it. And I think, in some corner of her heart, she justified it. Maybe she told herself Malcolm had changed. Maybe she believed that biology owed some kind of retroactive redemption. Maybe she convinced herself that calling me Daniel wasn't cruel, that it was just the way things were now. But I remembered. I remembered the night she got her first period and didn't want to talk to Leona. She came to me, whispered it like a secret. I drove to the pharmacy, flustered and out of my depth, bought everything on the shelf just in case. I remembered when she sprained her ankle before her big recital and cried on the kitchen floor while I rubbed ice packs into her skin. I remembered every birthday morning when I made cinnamon pancakes in the shape of her initials. And now, I was just Daniel, a vendor with a heart. I wanted to believe she still saw me, that maybe, deep down, she was just afraid to admit how much I meant because it might hurt less to keep me in the background. But every time she looked past me, every time she forgot to include me, that hope dimmed. Love doesn't always die in screams. Sometimes, it dies in silence, paid for in full. The morning of Sadie's wedding, I woke up before the sun, not from nerves or excitement, but out of habit, years of being the first one awake in a house that never really needed me to be. I made coffee, black and bitter, and stood by the window as the sky shifted from slate gray to a hesitant gold. The quiet was thick, the kind that settles in your chest like a warning. I put on my suit without ceremony, tying my tie slowly, deliberately, like armor. I arrived early at the venue. Some sprawling garden estate just outside the city, all manicured hedges and rented opulence. I was the one who had found it after Sadie sent me 3 links and said, "We like this one, but it's out of budget." I'd made a few calls, shifted a few things around, and made it fit. That had been 6 months ago. Since then, I've been the silent architect of every visible detail, the lighting, the sound check, the backup generator in case the power went out. I'd walked the property twice before anyone else had seen it. I knew where the sun would hit the arch at 4 p.m. I knew which path to avoid if it rained. That morning, I helped set up chairs, sweating through my undershirt in the humidity. I moved tables that weren't quite aligned, wiped fingerprints off glasses, and made sure the DJ had the correct playlists. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I did what I always did, made sure everything was perfect so she didn't have to worry. So she could just smile and walk down that aisle like the world was exactly how she dreamed it. And she did smile, just not at me. I saw her as she arrived, floating out of the white town car in her designer gown, veil fluttering like a promise in the breeze. She was breathtaking, radiant in the way only a bride can be. And she ran, not walked, straight into Malcolm's arms. He'd shown up late, naturally, wearing a suit that probably cost half what I'd paid for the reception lighting, reeking of expensive cologne and the confidence of someone who knew he'd be celebrated for merely showing up. Sadie threw her arms around him like a daughter greeting a soldier returning from war. She laughed, really laughed, head tilted back, unguarded and full of joy. She never looked in my direction. Not once. Guests began arriving. Leona greeted them with that practiced elegance I remembered from our early days. Grant paced nervously by the gazebo, adjusting his cufflinks every 3 seconds. Everyone seemed to know where they belonged, except me. The ceremony started right on time. I stood in the back row, near the audio booth, invisible in a crowd I had hand-selected through RSVP spreadsheets and guest list arguments. The officiant stepped forward and smiled into the microphone. "Who gives this bride away?" And then it happened. Sadie reached out, not for me, but for Malcolm. No hesitation, no glance in my direction, no pause. He took her hand, beamed like a hero, and walked her down the aisle as cameras flashed and guests sighed with emotion. I stood frozen, fingers curling into fists in my pockets, pretending not to feel the way the earth tilted under me. He gave her away, just like that. The man who missed birthdays. The man who had to be reminded of her major. The man who'd never picked her up after school when she had a fever or sat through a single parent-teacher conference. He got the walk, the glory, the moment. And I got a chair, not even in the front row. I sat next to an elderly cousin of Leona's who called me David and asked if I was friends with the groom. I didn't correct her. What was the point? In that moment, I was no one, just another suit in the crowd. During the vows, Sadie's voice cracked with emotion. She spoke about love and loyalty, about Grant being her safe place and best friend. She mentioned her mother, thanked her for her strength. She even paused to acknowledge Malcolm, her first hero. Her words echoed across the garden, and I sat in silence, the breath caught in my chest, clapping when everyone else did because muscle memory can be cruel like that. After the ceremony, as guests filtered into the reception area, I stayed behind, pretending to help the planner break down the altar. I needed a moment. Just one moment to collect myself, to bury whatever was unraveling inside. The reception was even worse. Malcolm gave the first speech, long, rambling, full of inside jokes that made Sadie throw her head back in laughter. He called her my girl 3 times. The crowd ate it up. Cameras flashed. Glasses clinked. No one noticed me sitting at the far edge of the tent, drinking sparkling water because I'd learned the hard way not to mix grief with alcohol. And then came the father-daughter dance. The DJ queued up some classic Motown number, and there they were again. Malcolm and Sadie in the center of the dance floor, swaying under fairy lights I'd paid to install. I watched them move, her head on his shoulder, his smile smug and satisfied. No one clapped for me. No one asked where I was. No one missed me. I stayed for another hour, maybe 2. Long enough to see the cake cutting, long enough to hear them toast each other and call the night perfect. And then, just before midnight, Sadie walked up to me. No smile, no gratitude. Just a folded sheet of paper in her manicured hand. Final wedding balance, she said. Thought you'd want to take care of it before we leave for Seychelles. No hug, no thanks, just obligation. Like she was handing a bill to a clerk. I opened the sheet. Line items stared back at me, some that I'd already paid, some I'd never heard of. Double billed, inflated, and bolded at the bottom was a total that nearly made me laugh. I looked up at her. Nothing in her eyes. Not shame, not pride. Just expectation. That's when I knew I was done. Not angry, not bitter, just done. I folded the paper, tucked it into my jacket, nodded once, and walked away. Right out of the tent, past the valet, through the parking lot, and into the night. No goodbyes, no drama, no explanations, just silence. Because sometimes, the loudest thing you can do is leave. I didn't slam the door when I got home that night. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just walked into the living room, dropped the folded invoice on the coffee table, and sat down. Everything felt surreal, too quiet, too still, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to crack. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at that sheet of paper like it was a verdict. Her handwriting was at the bottom. Sharp, tidy cursive. Appreciate you handling this. Not, thank you. Not, love you. Just, a command with a lace ribbon around it. The total at the bottom read $8,750. And that was after the $37,000 I'd already paid. Some of the charges were ones I remembered settling weeks ago. The string quartet, the monogrammed cocktail napkins, the cake upgrade. Double billed. As if I'd forget. As if I wasn't the one who had coordinated every last damn detail. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands pressed together. My mind wasn't racing, it was eerily calm, like a storm that had finally decided to fall silent. I thought about how many hours I'd spent organizing that wedding. How many weekends I gave up. How many compromises I made. How many times I told myself it wasn't about being seen, it was about doing what's right. But I'd been lying. Of course I wanted to be seen. Of course I wanted to matter. I just didn't know until I was erased how much that desire had rooted itself in me. The next morning, I brewed coffee and pulled out the receipts. Every last one. I kept them in a navy blue accordion folder tucked in the cabinet beneath my bookshelf. I'd labeled each section: venue, catering, attire, decor, music, transportation. Not because I was obsessive, but because I was thorough. Because I'd wanted to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Because I thought being prepared was how you proved you cared. I laid them out on the dining table, lined them up by date, item, and amount. A ledger of love, bought and paid. And when I reached the last one, something clicked. Not with a bang, with a chill. A quiet finality I couldn't unfeel. I've been paying to stay in someone's life. I wasn't asked to. I was expected to. Like it was my role, my job, my lifelong invoice. Around noon, I logged into the bank account I'd once opened with Leona, the joint one we'd agreed to use for wedding emergencies. I froze it. Just like that. No warning. No ceremony. Just a quiet reclaiming of boundaries I never should have let dissolve. Then I drafted a message. Short, direct, measured. Any outstanding costs are now between you and your biological father. Please direct further communication through your mother. Wishing you well. I didn't sign it. No, love, Dad. No, Daniel. Just words, straight from the part of me that still hurt but no longer bled. I had sinned. Then I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for the ache to shift. It didn't. Not then. But it also didn't get worse. That mattered. Around 3 p.m., Malcolm called. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear his voice. Not after he'd swaggered through that wedding like he'd raised her. But curiosity got the better of me, and I listened. His voice was as smug as I remembered. "Hey man," he began, like we were old college buddies catching up over beers. "Look, I heard about the message. Just wanted to say man to man. You shouldn't punish her for wanting her real dad involved. That's not what this is about, right? She loves you in her own way. Don't make this about ego. Real dad." That phrase echoed in my head like a nail being driven in. I replayed the message just to be sure I'd heard it right. Real dad. He'd been absent for years. He showed up for a few photo ops, and suddenly he was wearing the title like a badge he'd earned. And I was just supposed to step aside, fund the party, and smile. I stood up, heart pounding, not with rage, but with the clarity of a man done being used. That same afternoon, I pulled out my will. A plain manila folder I kept in my desk drawer. I hadn't looked at it in 2 years. Back when Sadie was still in college and called me after every exam. Back when I thought we were unshakable. Her name was on nearly everything: my savings, my life insurance, the condo I bought as a retirement investment. I rewrote it, removed her entirely. Instead, I redirected a large chunk of my estate to a scholarship fund for foster youth. Kids who never had anyone. Kids who'd give anything for a fraction of the attention I had poured into someone who now called me Daniel in public. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it to be free. Then I wrote Leona a letter. 3 pages. Calm. Direct. I told her I didn't blame her for everything. That I understood how grief, time, and circumstance could change the way a family breathes. But I also told her the truth. I couldn't be the man no one stood up for. The one people remembered only when the tab came due. I didn't raise Sadie to expect love without effort, but that's what we'd become, a family that kept me on retainer. I sealed the envelope, left it on her porch, and didn't look back. By sunset, I packed a bag and moved into the condo I'd quietly purchased months earlier. I told myself it was just an investment, a rental property, but somewhere deep down, I'd known. I'd felt the unraveling years before that wedding. I just hadn't wanted to name it. The space was smaller, simpler. 2 bedrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the river. It didn't echo the way our house did. And when I turned the key that first night and stepped inside, I didn't feel alone. I felt intact. I made a simple dinner: pasta, olive oil, garlic. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window while the city hummed outside. My phone buzzed a few times. Notifications I ignored. I was done answering calls I didn't know. And when I went to bed, I slept. Deep, dreamless. Not because everything was fixed, but because, finally, I had stopped paying for the illusion that it ever would be. The sun came in sharp through the condo blinds, slicing clean lines across the floor like a spotlight on a stage I never auditioned for. I didn't wake up in a rush. There was no reason to anymore. No errands to run for someone else's wedding. No passive-aggressive reminders in my inbox. No voicemail guilt trips or invoices to decipher. Just me, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the final silence I had earned. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Around 9 a.m., I opened the same navy blue folder I'd used to organize all the wedding costs. I laid every receipt across the dining table in neat, relentless rows, like evidence in a courtroom. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was tired. Of pretending, of excusing, of swallowing every bruise with a smile. I needed numbers now. Proof. Not because I needed justice. Because I needed the truth written in ink. Venue deposit, $12,000. DJ and lighting, $3,600. Customized decor and flower arrangements, $5,400. Invitations and calligraphy services, $2,100. Photographer's deposit and travel fee, $2,800. Cake upgrade and dessert bar, $1,200. Seamstress fittings for Sadie's dress for in total, $1,750. Portable bathroom rentals for outdoor guests, $750. Emergency generator rental, $400. Catering down payment for $1,700. Bar package, $3,300. Chauffeured car service, $1,500. Total, $39,500. All from my account. Not including the miscellaneous cash tips I handed out like mints that weekend. Not including the final wedding balance, she handed me with a smirk and a straight face, not including the parts of me I didn't charge for: my time, my presence, my dignity. 80% of that wedding was paid by me. 80%. And somehow, I wasn't even on the program. I wasn't acknowledged in the vows. I wasn't mentioned in the toasts. I didn't get a dance, or a smile, or a glance that said, "I see you." So I took a deep breath and did what accountants do when the numbers don't add up. I closed the book. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the wedding fund account Leona and I had opened together. There was still a small remainder in it, about $2,400. I froze it officially, not just with the bank, but in my mind. No more withdrawals. No more deposits. No more hoping that contributions would buy me connection. I drafted the message to Sadie on a blank screen. No drama. No anger. Just clarity. Any outstanding costs are now between you and your biological father. Please direct further communication through your mother. Wishing you well. I stared at it for a few minutes. Reread it. It wasn't cruel. It was clean. It was closure. Then I hit send. The little delivered checkmark blinked back at me like a tiny period at the end of a 10-year sentence. I didn't expect a reply. What I got instead was Malcolm's voicemail that afternoon, righteous and oily, like someone trying to claim spiritual ground on a floor they never built. "Man to man," he began. That phrase alone made me want to laugh. He hadn't earned the right to use it. Man to man, don't punish her for wanting her real dad. That's not what this is about, right? Come on, Daniel. Let's not make this about ego. Real dad. He said it like he hadn't missed recitals, science fairs, breakups, breakdowns. Like he hadn't mailed in his love like a subscription box and called it parenting. He said real dad, as if DNA alone made him worthy of the title. But the truth is, it's not biology that earns you that word. It's showing up when there's nothing in it for you. When no one's watching. When no one claps. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out the manila folder marked Estate Planning and opened my will again. Sadie had been the sole beneficiary of everything. I hadn't even second-guessed it before. My retirement savings. My life insurance policy. My condo. Everything I had built. No? I updated every section. Removed her name. It wasn't revenge. It was reality. I donated a large chunk to a scholarship foundation that served foster kids. Young people who would give anything for the kind of steady, undeserved love I had offered to someone who now called me Daniel. I created a fund in honor of my mother, who raised 3 of us on one income and never once let us feel unseen. I left a personal gift to my niece, who still called me on holidays and sent thank you notes when I helped with her tuition. And Sadie? I left her nothing. Not because I stopped loving her, but because love isn't the same as permission to be invisible. And when someone forgets the cost of your presence, it's time to remind them with your absence. Next, I wrote Leona a letter. 3 pages. Longhand. I hadn't written her anything by hand since the anniversary card I gave her 8 years ago. I told her I wasn't angry. Not at her. But I was done playing the uninvited guest in a family I helped raise. I told her I understood how things happen slowly. How love can shift shape when nobody's paying attention. But I also told her the truth. I couldn't stay where I wasn't needed. Not just in Sadie's life, but in hers. I told her I wasn't looking for apologies. Only space. I dropped it off at her house that evening. Quiet. No confrontation. Just a sealed envelope on the doorstep and the retreat of my footsteps as I walked away. Then I went back to the condo. I made a sandwich. Poured a drink. Watched the news on low volume. The quiet didn't feel like loneliness that night. It felt like relief. It felt like weight lifted from a life that had carried too many invisible bricks. Over the next few days, the silence held. No reply from Sadie. No knock from Leona. Just the thrum of my own thoughts and the slow return of peace. I cleaned the place, finally hung my photos on the wall, set up the reading corner I'd always wanted but never made time for. One night, I sat by the window, a book open in my lap, and asked myself the hardest question. Was it worth it? All the rides. The holidays. The nights by her sickbed. The inside jokes. The road trips. The walks home from heartbreak. The answer came back quiet, but solid. Yes, because love doesn't always come back the way you send it. Sometimes it takes a detour. Sometimes it never returns. But that doesn't mean it was wasted. It meant I was capable. It meant I was real. And that, after a decade of being mistaken for a placeholder, was enough. I didn't need to be the father she thanked in a speech. I didn't need to be the man she called on her wedding day. I didn't even need the title Dad if it meant I had to beg for it. What I needed was to stop offering my soul at the discount rate of obligation. That night, I went to sleep without checking my phone. And for the first time in months, I didn't dream of being left out. I dreamed of standing still, of being seen by myself. The voicemail sat there, unplayed, for almost an hour. Malcolm again. I didn't need to hear it. I already knew the cadence, confident, casual, coded in that performative concern that never actually cost him anything. He was always trying to smooth things over with the same kind of charm that let him disappear for most of Sadie's life without consequence. I finally pressed play. "Look, Daniel," he began, man to man again, "all right? Don't let this go too far. She's young. She doesn't mean it like that. You're blowing this out of proportion. Just come to Sunday dinner. Sit down. Talk it out. Don't punish her for needing her real dad. You know what I mean." I deleted it before it ended. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. That was its own kind of wound. I'd heard that phrase twice now, real dad, and both times, it landed like a stamp, a confirmation that I had officially been recategorized. A donor. Of time. Of money. Of patience. But not of meaning. That was the day I rewrote the final piece of my life. The will was already changed. The joint account closed. But something inside me still felt tethered. So I sat down in my office, small, clean, uncluttered, and opened a blank document. Not for Sadie. Not for Malcolm. Not even for Leona. For me. I wrote every memory I could recall with Sadie. The night she called me at 1 a.m. because her dorm mate had a panic attack and she didn't know what to do. The morning she spilled orange juice on her recital dress and cried until I went out and found the exact same one in her size, 2 towns over. The time she broke up with that boy in 12th grade and curled into my chest like she was 8 again. Page after page, I wrote it all down. Not to convince anyone, not to prove anything, but to remind myself that those moments were real, whether or not they made it into her Instagram captions or wedding speeches. They happened. I showed up. I mattered. Even if the world she was building now had no room for the version of me who once tucked her in. That night, I pulled the last of my boxes out of the garage. I had them from years ago, packed during one of Leona and I's rough patches. Back when I thought I'd need to leave, but didn't. Inside were old letters, a couple of Sadie's school drawings, Father's Day cards from when she still called me that. I kept 3. The rest I recycled. Grief is strange. It doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it's just a quiet sorting through of things you no longer have the strength to carry. The next morning, I took a walk through the neighborhood. It was cold, wind slicing down the street like it had something to say. I passed couples walking dogs, kids on bikes, joggers with headphones. All of them moving, living. I didn't envy them. I didn't feel invisible. I just felt still. Back at the condo, I made tea and stared at the fireplace I hadn't used yet. Something about a flame felt too symbolic, too dramatic. I wanted calm, not cleansing. Around noon, I drafted a letter to Leona. Not the emotional one I'd already left at her house. This one was practical, finalizing the transfer of anything else we'd shared. The spare car title, the last tax document. I asked her to have her lawyer contact mine. Clean cuts, no hard feelings. And I meant it. She replied later that evening. Just a short email. "I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it had gotten." But she had. They all had. It wasn't just what Sadie had done. It was what no one else had stopped. What no one questioned. What no one called out. I was only ever seen when there was a need. Never when there was love to give back. It wasn't rage that moved me anymore. It was release. That weekend, I began donating things. The extra suits I no longer wore. The spare tools. Even the fancy dinnerware I'd bought for Sadie's engagement party, which she canceled at the last minute because Malcolm had decided to take her to a fancier spot. I never told her I'd already placed the dinner order. Never mentioned the deposit. I just threw away the receipts and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It all did. So I gave it away, box by box, bag by bag, until my space felt lighter, until I could breathe without bumping into reminders of what I wasn't. On Sunday morning, I went to a diner across town, the kind of place with cracked leather booths and weak coffee. The waitress had a voice like gravel and called me Han without blinking. I sat there for hours with a notebook, jotting down things I wanted for myself. Small things. A reading chair. A trip upstate to see the foliage. Maybe an art class. I'd always wanted to learn to paint, but I'd convinced myself there wasn't time. There was time now. Halfway through my eggs and toast, an older man at the counter struck up a conversation. Said he used to be a high school teacher. Said he'd lost touch with all but one of his kids. He smiled through it, but I recognized the way his eyes dimmed when he said it. We talked for 45 minutes. About baseball. About the weather. About the absurdity of paying $5 for toast. It felt good to be seen without expectation. To be spoken to without performance. When I got home, there was a letter taped to my door. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. From Leona. The handwriting was familiar. A little shakier than I remembered. I opened it slowly, expecting an apology, maybe an explanation. Instead, it was short. I don't blame you. I never should have let it go on that long. I thought she'd grow out of it. I thought she'd come back to you on her own. I was wrong. I'm sorry I didn't protect what you gave us. I hope one day you'll forgive me. I truly do. There was no return address. No invitation to talk. Just a truth I had needed to hear months ago. I folded the letter and placed it inside the back of my will folder. Not because it changed anything, but because it mattered. Sometimes, closure doesn't come with doors slamming or tearful reunions. Sometimes it's a cold morning, a quiet ending, and a life that finally belongs to you again. And in that stillness, for the first time in years, I felt whole. It had been 7 days since I sent the message. 7 days of no calls, no texts, no knocks at my door. I thought the silence would bring peace, and in some ways, it had. But there's a strange kind of ache that settles in when you realize you weren't just invisible in your presence. You were disposable in your absence. I wasn't expecting a parade, but some part of me had anticipated a ripple, an echo, something. Then, on the 8th day, it came, and not a call, not a voicemail, but the sharp rapping of knuckles against Leona's front door. I had stopped by to drop off some leftover documents from the accountant. It was supposed to be quick, cordial. I didn't plan to linger. But there she was, Sadie, standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself like she was bracing against more than just the wind. Her hair was undone. No makeup. No designer labels. Just a too big sweatshirt and eyes that looked older than they should have. She didn't say my name. Not at first. Just stood there, shifting from foot to foot, like she didn't quite know if she had the right to speak. I thought you'd be gone, she finally said. I shrugged. Just finishing some paperwork. She nodded, then looked down at the concrete like it had answers she hadn't found anywhere else. I didn't come for drama, she said, voice quiet. I don't know what to say to make it better. I studied her, the girl I'd raised, now a woman I barely recognized. Try starting with my name. She flinched. That's when she said it. Dad. It didn't come out with confidence. It came out like an apology wrapped in a question. I know I haven't earned that lately, she added. I know I've been cruel, distant, ungrateful. I didn't even realize how much until I started writing it all down. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook, thick and worn at the edges. She held it like something sacred. I started listing everything you've done. Not money, not wedding stuff, the real things. I crossed my arms, saying nothing. She opened the notebook. Pages flipped like a wind tunnel was ripping through them, but her hands shook just enough to make the sound feel fragile. I remembered the time I had that awful stomach flu, and you sat outside the bathroom door all night just to make sure I didn't fall. I remembered when Malcolm forgot my 10th birthday, and you bought me that telescope and said, if he can't show up, then let's find something bigger to look at. Her voice cracked on that one. You never miss the little things, and I made them disappear like they didn't matter. I said nothing. I wanted her to sit in the weight of it. She sniffed, wiped her nose with her sleeve. What'd I have to do? She asked, barely above a whisper. To undo this. To fix it. What do I have to do? And that was the question, wasn't it? The one she should have asked before the dress fitting, before the aisle, before the balance sheet she tossed at me like a receipt for dog food. What do I have to do? I stepped onto the porch beside her. The air between us was heavy with too many years and too few truths. I don't have a checklist, I said. I'm not looking for a refund. I'm not angry that you needed Malcolm. I'm angry that you erased me to make room for him. Like I was a placeholder instead of the reason you ever had stability to begin with. I know, she said, tears now sliding freely. I thought I was doing what brides are supposed to do. Honor their father. But I let the wrong man take the place of the right one. I leaned against the porch column. My chest hurt in that dull, tired way that follows a heart that's been bent too long. I'm not going to tell you how to fix this, I said. That's your job. I did the building. I laid the bricks. If the roof caved in, you'll have to learn how to rebuild it from the rubble. I don't know where to start, she admitted. Then that's your first task, I said. Figure it out. I stepped back toward my car, but she followed me. Do you still love me? She asked, not with entitlement, but with fear. I paused, keys in hand. Sadie, love was never the question. Respect was. She looked at the ground again. I'll earn it back, she said. You'll try, I corrected. That's all you can promise. And then I left. Not in anger, not in triumph, but in control. For the first time in years, I had set the terms. I wasn't her banker. I wasn't her safety net. I was a man who gave all he had to someone who forgot how to hold it. And now, finally, I'd handed the weight back to her. For days passed before I saw her again. This time, she didn't come to Leona's. She came straight to my office. Unannounced. No text. No warning. Just a soft knock on the glass door that separates the real work from the personal. I was mid-call with a supplier, mid-sentence about shipment delays, when I saw her standing there. Shoulders squared, eyes unblinking, a manila folder clutched tight against her chest like it might disappear if she let it go. I wrapped up the call quickly, slid my phone aside, and gestured for her to come in. She didn't speak at first, just walked in slowly, like the floor might give way beneath her. When she sat down across from me, I noticed the folder shaking ever so slightly in her grip. Not from cold, from nerves. That was new. She placed it on the desk between us. Gently. Deliberately. Then looked me in the eye. I've spent the last 3 nights building this, she said. I didn't open it right away. I waited. I wanted her to tell me what it was without the crutch of presentation. There's a reconciliation spreadsheet, she started. Every line item from the wedding. Every payment. Yours, mine, Malcolm's, such as they were. I cross-checked every vendor invoice. Even called a few of them to confirm the amounts. You were right. I double-billed you. Not intentionally, but I let it happen. Still, I said nothing. I wanted her to keep going. There's a repayment plan in there too. 3 years. I broke it down by month. It's signed. I'm holding myself accountable. Her voice didn't shake now. It was steadier than I'd ever heard it. This wasn't a performance. There were no tears. No mascara trails or dramatic pauses. Just Sadie. Just facts. There's also a letter in there, she added, typed. Because I needed to make sure I got it all out without losing my place. It's an acknowledgement of what you did, of who you were, of how badly I treated you. I finally opened the folder. The spreadsheet was meticulous, color-coded, detailed, with tabs for each vendor and a column titled Responsibility Adjusted. Her signature sat at the bottom of the payment plan. Neat, clear, adult. Then the letter. 3 pages, printed on ivory paper. I scanned the opening paragraph and stopped cold. I didn't forget what you did, Daniel. I just acted like it didn't matter. And that was worse. I didn't need to read the rest right away. I would later, in quiet. But even that line told me everything I needed to hear. She hadn't forgotten the breakfasts I made or the field trips I chaperoned. She hadn't erased the tie I wore to her 8th grade father-daughter breakfast or the hours I sat through her school musicals. She had buried them, pushed them aside. Because honoring one father had meant discarding the other, and she'd made the wrong choice. She looked up at me, eyes clear. I wasn't raised to be that kind of person, but I became her anyway. For the first time in months, I exhaled without feeling like I was breaking apart inside. You remembered, I said quietly. I remembered everything, she replied. The long drives to campus. The way you always let me sit in silence when I didn't want to talk. The time I broke my phone and you drove across town in the rain just to bring me a charger before finals. I remembered the blue tie, the muffins, the way you never once used what you gave me as leverage. Her throat tightened. You weren't a placeholder. You were the only one who stayed. That was the part one hadn't let myself believe. That deep down, maybe she had seen me. Maybe not always, maybe not with the clarity I had longed for, but enough. Enough that the memories had endured, even beneath the noise. I leaned back in my chair, the folder still open in front of me. The numbers are accurate, I said. She nodded. I checked them 3 times. And the payments. The first one went through this morning. You didn't have to start yet, I said. I did, she answered. Because if I waited, it would feel like I was still asking you to hold the burden. This is mine now. I studied her face. There was no desperation in her expression, no performance, just ownership. I'm not after the money, I said. You know that. I know, she said, but I need to do this. Not because it equals what you gave me. It never could, but because it's the only tangible way I know how to show you I'm serious. I closed the folder and set it aside. Then let's see how serious you are. She looked surprised. Relieved, maybe. She didn't thank me. She didn't leap across the desk for a hug. She just nodded, like she understood this wasn't the end of the conversation, just the beginning of a long one, measured in time, not words. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door. I'm not asking for us to go back, she said. I know that's not fair. I just hope one day I can build something new with you. Whatever that looks like. I gave a small nod. We'll see. And that was the truth. I didn't need an instant fix. I didn't want a cinematic redemption arc. What I demanded was consistency, integrity, time. She left the office quietly, the door clicking softly behind her. I looked down at the folder one more time. At the letter, the spreadsheet, the signature. It didn't fix everything, but it finally acknowledged the ledger. And that, for now, was enough. 6 months. That's how long it's been since the day she stood in my office, folder in hand, voice steady and eyes raw. In those 6 months, Sadie has paid every installment without fail. On the first of each month, like clockwork, a payment arrives, accompanied not by silence, but by a short message. Sometimes it's simple, paid, hope you're well. Sometimes it's a little longer, thinking of you today. Just past the coffee shop we used to go to after practice. Nothing rehearsed. No overcompensating. Just honest. We talk now. Once a week. No scripts. No background noise of guilt or tension. We've kept it easy. Calls on Sunday evenings that start with a hey and end when they end. Some last 10 minutes. Others stretch past an hour. She tells me about work, about Grant, about how she's been trying to get back to herself. I don't pry. I don't ask for reflections or declarations. I just listen. And slowly, without planning to, I begin sharing too. I've told her about the art class I started taking at the community center. About the older man in my class who paints the same tree every week and still finds something new in it. I told her about the jazz band that plays in the park near my condo every Thursday night and how I've started showing up just to listen, even if I'm alone. And she listens. Really listens. That was never our problem, love. It was recognition. Being seen. And now, I feel seen. She even asked if I'd consider being part of her child's life. She's pregnant. 4 months in. It caught me off guard the way only unexpected tenderness can. She didn't tell me over the phone. She showed up one Sunday, no warning, a paper bag in one hand and something like vulnerability in the other. She didn't make a grand announcement. Just sat on the porch swing beside me, passed over a sonogram, and said, I understand if you say no. I didn't say anything right away. I studied the grainy, black and white swirl on the screen. I could barely make out the curve of a spine, a head, a heartbeat. You don't have to, she whispered. You've done more than enough. And that was the moment it shifted. She knew. She finally understood that what I gave wasn't measured in dollars or deeds. It was measured in presence, in patience, in showing up again and again, even when the door was closing on my fingers. I looked at her, saw the girl I raised and the woman she was becoming, and I smiled. Not out of obligation, not out of habit, but because something deep in me finally exhaled. I've got bedtime stories stacked for days, I said. She laughed, a real laugh, head tilted back, hand over her stomach. That same kind of laugh I remembered from when she was 13 and we watched ridiculous movies during flu season. It felt like hearing a song I hadn't realized I missed. Leona and I, we talk again. Not about us. That part of the story is over, and we both know it. But there's a peace between us now. A mutual understanding. She apologized, quietly and without excuse, and I accepted it, not because everything was forgiven, but because I no longer needed to carry the bitterness. It's strange how powerful silence can be. It can destroy you, or it can set you free. For me, letting go of needing closure from everyone else was the very thing that gave me closure. We meet sometimes for coffee. We exchange updates. She's good at asking the kind of questions that land soft. She told me she's glad Sadie came around. I told her it's not about coming around. It's about showing up. Again and again. And me? I've changed. I won't lie and say I'm some entirely new man, reborn through heartbreak and healed by fatherhood's long arc. But I am different. I no longer chase validation. I don't measure love by acknowledgement anymore. I've learned the hard way that being essential in someone's life and being appreciated for it are not always the same thing. But when those two finally meet, when someone sees you for what you are, not just what you give, it's transformative. There's a wall in my condo where I've started hanging small mementos. Not photographs, not awards, just reminders. A drawing Sadie made in 2nd grade. The blue tie I wore to her father-daughter breakfast. A handwritten recipe card from my mother. A paintbrush from my art class. They're not curated for visitors. They're not displayed to impress. They're there for me. Because the greatest revenge isn't absence. It's presence on your terms. It's living in your truth so fully that no one can define your worth for you again. Not a child. Not a spouse. Not society. Not the ghosts of what should have been. I still get asked sometimes, by friends, by colleagues, how I feel about it all. About Sadie. About the wedding. About the way it unfolded. I always say the same thing. She's not who she was. And neither am I. And that's the gift of all this pain. The evolution. Not a fairy tale ending. Not a picture-perfect reunion. But a reshaping. Of identity. Of purpose. Of boundaries. Sadie is still paying her way back. Not in money, though that continues. But in effort. In consistency. In choosing to stay even when it would be easier to walk away again. That's how I know this time is different. Because love without effort is a favor. And I'm no one's favor. So now, as I sit on this porch with a baby book on my lap and a cup of tea in my hand, I don't think about what I lost. I think about what I refuse to let go of, my integrity, my heart, my history. And when that child is born, when their eyes open to this chaotic, beautiful world, they'll have a grandfather who knows the cost of presence, who knows the weight of silence, who understands that sometimes the deepest love doesn't roar. It waits, it watches, and when it's finally seen, it stays.